The Legend of Sunset Shimmer, Ocarina of Time. By Ganondorf 8. April 25, 2015. Chapter 64, A Clash of Magic. The moment she saw Trixie and the other witch return, Rainbow Dash got back onto her feet, and the expression on her face was one of sheer rage. I couldn't blame her considering she had spent the last 7 years trapped inside of a suit of armor, and had been forced to obey all commands given to her. She was an inspiration where her act of defiance should have inspired her people to do the same, yet these witches made sure they never had the notion. As I was looking at the other witch, I knew she was from Equestria as I could sense something, and that was when I remembered my studies with Princess Celestia. One of her lessons talked about a race of beings known as changelings who could mimic others by stealing their identities, and their ruler commanded them with integrity and grace. Of course, the one who finds food for them? Chrysalis, yet she is related to Trixie in this world. Just when I thought things couldn't get any weirder, yet I merely decided to go along with it. Speaking of the witches, they also had expressions of rage, for their plan had failed because of a factor which they didn't count on.
What happened? The forest girl was on the verge of being killed, and here she is having defeated our guardian,
said Trixie.
Everything was going exactly as we had planned, but it seems we neglected a factor which we never considered. Who would have expected that wretched she-demon interfering, and actually helping her out? We assumed that she despised her good half, yet in the end she went against her nature. Our plan has been thwarted simply because of an unexpected twist,
said Chrysalis.
We should have destroyed the she-demon Kotake, but instead we chose to keep her alive because the great Ganondorf willed it. Like I kept saying, our son has been undermining us all because we've not lived up to his expectations,
said Trixie. This was very informative for me because it shows they were having serious issues with regards to how the evil king treats them. While I could try to take advantage of the situation, I'm just going to let this play out and see where it goes.
I suppose we should have anticipated this because the forest girl has proven to be most unpredictable, yet we still have complete control of the situation. Yes, there is no need to panic, for we can turn this around, and kill the girl before she can awaken the final sage,
said Trixie.
Forest girl, we shall concede that you defeated our guardian despite having assistance, but know that you haven't won yet. If you truly wish to awaken the one who is destined to become the sage, you must defeat us in battle. Of course, we both know that this is what you want because you desire us to pay for our crimes according to that outburst prior to entering our sanctum,
said Chrysalis.
We have prepared an ideal arena which lies beyond this room,
said Trixie. I have no idea as to what kind of arena has been arranged for this upcoming conflict, but I know that I will do fine given that I have the mirror shield in my possession. Of course, things never do go the way you intended them to, and this was no different because I had completely forgotten about Rainbow Dash. Trixie and Chrysalis on the other hand were aware she was no longer under their control, so they were probably concocting something in their minds to force her to have to fight me again.
Hey! I've got some words to say to you, and you'd better listen up,
said Rainbow Dash.
What's this? The former second-in-command of the Gerudo is speaking to us?
Asked Trixie.
In all of this fervor against the forest girl, we neglected the fact that she has been returned to normal,
replied Chrysalis.
I've been told by Sunset Shimmer over here that you two brainwashed me into becoming your obedient servant, and that I've been trapped inside a suit of armor for the last 7 years,
said Rainbow Dash.
What you've been told is the truth,
said Trixie.
Now it's all starting to make sense, although I had a suspicion about it a long time ago. You two made sure none of the Gerudo betrayed Ganondorf because you wanted us to remain loyal. Anyone who showed any signs of defiance were punished, and that apparently involved being brainwashed if succumbing to the desert didn't happen. I served as second in command of the tribe, for you wanted me to keep everyone else under control, but you never figured out until much later that I wasn't fond of him. When you learned the truth about me, you needed to get rid of me before I could ruin whatever you desired Ganondorf to do by informing the others about what was really going on,"
said Rainbow Dash.
"Quite the delectable speech there, Neighboru,"
commented Chrysalis.
"But flawed all the same,"
said Trixie.
"What do you mean flawed?"
asked Rainbow Dash.
"We always knew about your desire to betray the great Ganondorf, yet since he was in love with you at the time, he believed you would turn around and become faithful to his vision for the future. You were chosen for the reasons you stated, so we don't deny that in any way, but we decided to use Spitfire as a means of keeping a close eye on your actions. Should you have strayed from your destined path in life, she would inform us of every last detail, and in return we groomed her in order to replace you as the next second in command,"
replied Chrysalis. Hearing all of this made me feel rather ill, but not because of being disgusted with how these two have been manipulating events. No, I felt ill as Rainbow Dash's story was a near carbon copy of my problem with regards to Sunset Demon. She claimed that I strayed away from my path, and was determined to make sure I go back. In this situation, Rainbow Dash ended up choosing a different path, so she was forced to become loyal to Ganondorf. Even if it meant losing her freedom in the process, and becoming nothing more than a slave. It reminded me of what I once did to the entire student body of Canterlot High. I robbed them of their freedom and turned them into mindless minions because it was the obvious thing to do at the time. I was forcing them to turn to the ways of darkness, and it almost ended up working, but luckily my friends defeated me before things could get worse. Just when it looked as though I was finally going to stop allowing my past to torment me, another memory comes back and haunts me.
"I can never forgive you for what you did to Spitfire,"
said Rainbow Dash.
"We aren't to blame, Neighboru, because it was a result of your own actions which forced us to rely on such means,"
said Trixie.
"She was merely the right person to manipulate, for the Gerudo had to remain loyal to the great Ganondorf,"
said Chrysalis.
"If only you had chosen to remain loyal, then none of this would have happened, and we would be living in a world which belongs to the Gerudo. You know that our people have been mistreated by the other tribes for centuries, and while time has passed since then, we haven't forgotten about the atrocities. Why deny us what we deserve by choosing to defy your king?"
asked Trixie. It's a good thing that I was told about some aspects of Gerudo history, otherwise all of this would be just sailing over my head, but it seems there was a lot more to this than I originally thought. Much like Sunset Demon, the witches were trapped in the past, and wanted things to stay that way.
"Of course, we wouldn't expect someone like you to understand, Neighboru, for you're just a little girl. However, we do acknowledge that you did have a lot of respect among the Gerudo. It was only natural given that you were well liked before you ascended,"
said Chrysalis.
"Next to the great Ganondorf, they worshipped the very ground that you walked on,"
said Trixie.
"That's because my aim was to show them that we didn't need the likes of Ganondorf around, so I began showing them what our society could become were we to be free of the machinations of a man who wanted power,"
said Rainbow Dash.
"Which proved to be our biggest concern, especially during such a delicate moment,"
said Chrysalis.
I would have remained loyal had he chosen a more different path instead of wanting to conquer Hyrule, but the lust in his heart for power was just too much for me to want to continue serving him. I have you to thank because you were the ones who raised him, and during my exile, I figured out you wanted our people to achieve a destiny which had never been realized before. There was a reason why the other tribes had fear of us, and it was because we chose to dabble in ancient magic which was viewed as dangerous in their eyes. When we moved from sorcery and became thieves, all we did was change our approach, yet the goal was still the same. We were still viewed with contempt which resulted in generations of mistreatment,"
said Rainbow Dash.
"Which is why we needed a Gerudo to wield the throne,"
said Trixie. Now things were starting to make sense, yet I was shocked at how this whole thing had existed even before Ganondorf was born. They were mistreated all because of being different, and the other tribes refused to accept their way of life. It reminds me of the ancient stories of Equestria where unicorns, Pegasus, and earth ponies used to treat one another with such disdain. Eventually, all three tribes learned to appreciate one another, and things have been wonderful since then, but it seems the Gerudo were never given that opportunity. That may explain why the old king was trying so hard to form an alliance with them, for he believed they deserved a chance to become part of something greater. He wanted to wipe the slate clean as it were, but I guess old wounds are difficult to heal given the animosity.
"No, what we needed was to join the alliance,"
said Rainbow Dash.
"You speak of that pointless unification that was offered by the Hylian king?"
asked Chrysalis.
"If we had agreed to become a true territory within Hyrule, our lives would have gradually become a lot better. Sure, it would have taken a couple of generations before seeing any actual progress, but we wouldn't have been stuck in the past. Of course, Ganondorf had a much different idea, and that was seek out power. He took advantage by using his political influence to manipulate the situation to his will, and then he made his move which resulted in the world we have now,"
replied Rainbow Dash.
"And what a glorious one it is,"
laughed Trixie.
"Only for the Gerudo who honestly don't know any different, and the other tribes have been suffering since,"
said Rainbow Dash.
"It seems you are unappreciative of our work,"
said Chrysalis.
"Which is an unfortunate shame, but we do have an idea as to how we can fix that,"
said Trixie. I could see the look on her face, and I wasn't liking where this was going.
"You served the great Ganondorf, both willingly and as our slave, yet it seems you need to have some more understanding of how things really work. So, we shall make you serve him for a little while longer until you end up succumbing to his dominion, or perish in the process."
If they force Rainbow Dash to become a mindless slave again, that would mean I'd have to fight her again, so I needed to step in before anything happens. Unfortunately, Trixie noticed what I was doing, and suddenly her eyes began glowing. I then discovered that I couldn't move an inch as though I had been frozen in place.
"Yes, let's brainwash her again,"
laughed Chrysalis.
"No. I won't let you use me like a puppet,"
said Rainbow Dash.
"You don't really have a say in the matter,"
laughed Trixie. Both witches then raised their hands and fired an orange and a blue fireball respectively which traveled across the room. Rainbow Dash then ran towards the door hoping she could escape, but she was struck by both magical blasts which caused her to disappear, and her scream was the last thing I heard. What was ironic in a bad way was that she couldn't open the door as it was sealed shut on this side.
"Now that she has been taken care of, all that remains is you, Forest Girl. We're surprised that you have been so quiet this entire time,"
said Chrysalis.
"I didn't want to interfere with something which had nothing to do with me on a personal level, but that's now changed when you pulled that stunt. I feel so much pity for both of you for not understanding the truth even when it's right in front of you. The Gerudo have been mistreated for generations, and I understand better than you think when it comes to being mistreated, but you need to move on and not allow it to consume you forever.
I said.
You have pity for us?
Asked Trixie.
Only because of how you've suffered,
I replied. Deep down, I knew my words weren't going to mean anything to them, for they had obviously closed their hearts off a long time ago, so I was merely wasting my breath, which meant I needed to prepare for whatever tricks they had up their sleeves.
Such sympathetic words hold no meaning for us, forest girl, but you should be concerned with your own well-being given how you're in our temple. While you may think that you can defeat both of us, that is nothing more than an act of grandeur on your part, for we were watching the battle you had against our Iron Knuckle. You struggled against our creation, and needed the help of that wretched she-demon to achieve victory. The chances of you defeating us on your own are pitiful at best, so we shall provide an opportunity for you to simply turn around and leave," said Chrysalis. "I will unlock the door to this room," said Trixie. She then raised her hand where a white light suddenly appeared which almost blinded me, but it quickly disappeared, yet I knew what she had done. "You have two decisions ahead of you which you can make. The first would be to leave this room via the way you came in, and never pose a threat to the great Ganondorf again. The second would be to enter door ahead of you, but know that choosing to move forward means you have effectively thrown your life away. What is it going to be? I hope you make the right decision," said Chrysalis. With what constituted as a threat from my perspective, the two witches vanished into smoke. This did leave me with a decision to make, but not the one they were expecting me to consider. I had no desire to run away, especially after witnessing Rainbow Dash disappear again, yet I was thinking of something else which was said. It was true that Sunset Demon bailed me out against the Iron Knuckle, so I know she won't help again, but how do I truly stack up against them? Am I really strong enough to defeat them both, break the curse on the Spirit Temple, and awaken the final sage? "Quite a lot of information we've learned," said Spike. "More than what I was expecting," I said. "Who would have guessed that there was so many problems among the Gerudo which date back for centuries?" I asked. "We were aware of some of them according to what Spitfire, Neburu, Sonata, and Arya shared with us, yet what they knew were small pieces of a larger situation that goes beyond our heads. I'll admit that I was surprised you offered the witches any kind of sympathetic ear, but I can understand why you did, because it reminds you of your past experiences. Still, you can't allow such feelings to get in the way of what needs to be done," replied Spike. "I know, but I wanted to see if I could perhaps persuade them to change. It wasn't going to happen, of course, as those two are way too far gone to be saved, and that's why we must go forward. I'm not going to run away, for this has gotten personal when Rainbow Dash was taken against her will again. I'm concerned though about not being strong enough, considering Sunset Demon did help me to free Rainbow Dash from her imprisonment as an Iron Knuckle. I almost got killed in that previous battle despite having two bottled fairies on standby, so I feel that my chances of defeating Trixie and Chrysalis are pretty slim," I said. "But not impossible?" asked Spike. "No, I have a chance, but a slim one," I replied. "Then all you can do is your very best, but I must remind you that the fate of Hyrule does hang in the balance," said Spike. That is probably the one thing which bothers me more than anything else, and that was all this pressure of saving the world. While I do want to restore Hyrule to normal, I do find that having such a weight on my shoulders makes me question myself more often than not.
I know Spike says what he does as a means of giving me the proper encouragement, but there are times where I don't need to have those kinds of words thrown into my face. Unlike Twilight, who has probably saved Equestria about half a dozen times, I haven't really done anything like that, and I don't include defeating the Dazzlings as that was me giving unnecessary assistance. This must be what she has to endure all the time whenever the fate of Equestria hangs in the balance. If there was a feeling of wanting to mock her for what she's done, I won't consider it because I'm now experiencing it for myself.
Before we move on, I have one question,
I began.
What's that?
Asked Spike.
Do you suppose Sunset Demon was right about me not wanting to have power?
I asked.
That's a difficult question for me to answer, Sunset Shimmer, and I'm not going to hide the truth when I say that the she-demon may have been right. While her methods are wrong, the idea of wanting power is actually very reasonable. There are a lot of people who desire power, for it's a force many believe in, for if you have power then you can have anything you. Wisdom and courage are other powers which are sought, yet power always outshines them, especially when living in a world where monsters are frequent. Power is viewed as being the one thing you need to achieve happiness, but I wouldn't go that far considering there is a price one has to pay,
replied Spike.
I should know because I've been there myself,
I said.
There is nothing wrong with wanting power, but it needs to be for the right reasons. Otherwise, you end up corrupted and obsessed with wanting so much more, and you lose sight of what you originally were pursuing. Sunset Demon chastises you because you don't want the kind of power she has, yet you desire some because of wanting it for the right reasons. You do have a power deep inside which has been helpful since the start, and that is having a strong heart. Granted, having powerful weapons and magic doesn't hurt either,
said Spike. Apart from that slight wisecrack, he did make a valid point about wanting power for what you believed was right, but not being consumed until you become reliant on it. To think that I almost got there when I first became the she-demon, yet I was lucky to have been given the chance to pull back. Others never got the same opportunity, and it makes me feel bad that they ended up succumbing to such a twisted desire.
Pretty good answer, I said. I'm glad you liked it,
smiled Spike.
Guess I can seek out power, but within a good reason, I said.
With that notion in my head, I checked to make sure I was prepared, and then I entered the door which was situated behind the throne. This next room was just a long corridor leading up to a portcullis at the end which was accurate with the rest of the temple structure. Torches were lining both walls which gave off a rather uneasy feeling, but I can't turn back now after coming all this way.
Is it just me, or is this room really creepy? They are trying to scare you,
replied Spike.
And it's working somewhat, I said. Don't let them get through to you like that, otherwise you'll fail before even starting,
said Spike.
Yes, you're right. I must remain calm, and not allow myself to get intimidated. Besides, I have my ace in the form of my transformation, yet I can only rely on it as a last-ditch effort as it lasts for a short period before I change back. Since Trixie and Chrysalis have been watching me since I first entered the desert, they most likely are aware of the limitations I have when I gain my pony, ears and tail, and that does take away my advantage,
I said.
Do you think they have a countermeasure for it?
Asked Spike.
We'll know soon enough,
I replied. Walking down this long corridor felt really daunting, but I kept going as the witches needed to be defeated. Upon opening the portcullis, and entering what I suspect is the arena, the room itself was pretty large, and consisted of a giant pillar in the center which was surrounded by 4 smaller ones on each side. The walls of the giant pillar were covered in vines, so at least I know how to get up to the top.
I wonder where those witches are hiding. I doubt they are hiding because they are insistent on fighting,
replied Spike.
Escape could be an option, but I suspect otherwise,
I said.
You should climb to the top of this giant pillar, for we do need to get a better feel of the room,
suggested Spike. Walking towards the wall, and climbing up to the top, I saw that the surface of this pillar featured a rather unusual pattern which made no sense to me, but I suspect it was a Gerudo pattern of some description.
No one is here,
I said.
They have to be, otherwise this was a pointless threat,
said Spike.
Maybe I should walk towards the center as I am slightly curious about this pattern,
I suggested. Taking a few steps forward, I quickly came to a stop when the room suddenly got dark as though someone had blown out some candles. That was when I heard laughing coming from somewhere, and that meant the witches were ready to get things underway. I immediately drew the Master's sword and the Mirror's shield because the latter was going to be my main means of handling them.
So you decided to come and face us after all,
said Trixie.
A smarter person would have chosen to run away, but you've proven just how stupid you are for coming here to your death. We gave you the chance to flee, but now you're here, and escape is impossible. Our plans may have failed to kill you, Forest Girl, but now witness the might of the Gerudo,
said Chrysalis.
I have a name, you know,
I moaned.
And what would that be?
asked Trixie.
Sunset Shimmer,
I shouted.
We'll make sure to remember that name,
said Chrysalis.
Because when you are dead and need to be buried, we wouldn't want you to have an unmarked grave now, would we? Since you gave us the liberty, your name, allow us to do so in kind,
said Trixie. Both witches then laughed again before two magical circles, one orange and the other blue, appeared to my left and right, and Trixie came up from her circle first, where her hair suddenly burst into flames. At first I thought she had lost her mind, but then I noticed that it was a magical flame.
With my flame, I will burn you to the bone, and you shall never forget my name, Coom, Sorceress of Fire.
Then Chrysalis came up from her blue circle of fire, which was followed by her hair bursting into flames, yet for some reason it looked better on her than it did with Trixie.
With my cold, I will freeze her to her soul, and I, Kotakit, Sorceress of Ice, shall laugh at your misery,
said Chrysalis.
Then at last, our battle shall begin,
laughed Trixie.
Try to at least make this entertaining, child, for we rarely get to do this,
laughed Chrysalis. The two of them then got on their brooms, and began flying around before circling a few times where their elbows touched one another, which looked rather awkward. After that, they separated by going to their respective corners, and then proceeded to start flying wherever they wanted. Already, I had a feeling this was going to be difficult, and the battle had only gotten started, but I was having some trouble keeping track of both of them because one was flying in one location, and the other in another.
Okay, I'm finding it hard to keep my eyes on both witches,
I said.
Even though you've battled multiple monsters at once, this is on a different level. Still, you have the necessary weapon which can defeat them, but I suspect they won't make things easy for you. Coom is the Sorceress of Fire, so she will use fire magic, which sadly does bring yours to shame because she has much more experience than you do. When she fires her magic, it will cover a very large range, and inflicts a ton of damage before disappearing after about 5 seconds. You may have resistance to fire, but that isn't going to stop you from being burned. She does appear to have a problem regarding cold temperatures, so perhaps that can be useful,
said Spike.
And what about the other one?
I asked.
Kotaka, sorceress of ice, will use ice magic against you, and while it does have the same range as what her sister can do, ice is perhaps the worse of the two elements. If you get caught, you'll be frozen on the spot until the ice melts after a few seconds, and you will take heavy damage as a result. This witch seems to have some issues with warm temperatures, so I think you get the idea,"
replied Spike. I needed to use the mirror shield to reflect their magic back at them, which is what Flash Sentry mentioned, but how can I get both of them close to each other? Before I could even come up with an ideal strategy, Trixie then began conjuring up some kind of barrier where she was flying, and it looked really dangerous, which meant I need to prepare an ideal defense.
"What is she doing?"
I asked.
"She's about to use her fire magic, so get out of the way,"
replied Spike.
"But, aren't I supposed to absorb her spell using my mirror shield?"
I asked.
"Yes, but you aren't ready yet,"
replied Spike. It turned out he was right, as by the time I raised the shield up, Trixie had already fired her magic, and I got caught in the middle of the inferno. I may have a resilience to fire, but this was still pretty painful. I struggled to get out from the blaze, but the smoke was blocking my vision, making me lose even more damage.
"Now do you see what you're up against?"
asked Trixie.
"Yes, but it won't stop me,"
I replied.
"Then you've proven just how stubborn you truly are, so be punished for your stupidity,"
said Trixie. She then began creating another barrier before launching it a few seconds later, and even though I was able to absorb some magic into the mirror shield, I didn't take the entire lot, so I found myself being consumed with flames again, but I'm glad it wasn't the freezing cold.
"It seems you lack common sense to know how to use that shield, and that's a shame because we were hoping that you could last a while longer. You've had plenty of fun against the girl, so give me a chance to show her what I can do,"
suggested Chrysalis.
"By all means,"
said Trixie.
"Now you will feel the cold chill of my ice magic as it freezes you to the very core of your being,"
said Chrysalis. She started to create a barrier of her own, and I was ready for it this time. As she fired it, Trixie suddenly got in my way by causing a distraction, so I got frozen on the spot when the cold ice struck me. This was an experience I didn't want to feel again because of almost freezing to death back in the past. When I finally broke free, all I could hear was the laughter of the witches as they mocked me.
"It seems you really don't like being frozen, do you? While fire can easily destroy a forest, the cold can achieve a more destructive result. I wouldn't be surprised if my chill ended up killing you." "What about my fire?"
asked Trixie.
"It can perform just as well, yet my ice can do the job better,"
replied Chrysalis.
"I suppose you do bring a valid point, but it sounds like you believe your magic is better than mine,"
said Trixie.
"Not at all, for I would never undermine you, Coom. You're my sister after all, and we are both equally powerful. This girl isn't even going to last long enough to be a true threat, and for that we don't even need to rely on our true power,"
said Chrysalis. Just hearing them talking about how they plan on killing me made them look pathetic. Granted, I can't really say that considering how I've been on the receiving end since this battle started. At that moment Chrysalis was about to use her magic again, but I need to concentrate on her, and ignore Trixie no matter what she tries to do. I raised my shield and reflected the ice magic back at the source, which did nothing at first, but I suddenly remembered Chrysalis is weak to fire, and Trixie to ice, so I changed direction at the last minute, and the cold magic struck Trixie, catching her off guard.
"What in the world?"
exclaimed Trixie.
Looks like I know how to use the mirror shield after all, I said. Consider that nothing more than a lucky shot,
said Trixie.
You can say it however you want, but it looks like I've figured out what must be done, I said. Don't act all confident because this is only the beginning. Kotake, I believe it's your turn to use your magic, and make sure you do it right this time. That cold just doesn't suit me because of my fiery nature, but I'm sure it will be fully enjoyed by the forest girl,
said Trixie. It looks like there is some friction going on between them, but whether I can use it to my advantage remains to be seen. Chrysalis then used her ice magic, but she did so without warning, and I ended up freezing again. I could feel my health draining away, and it was a reminder of the iron knuckles of the spirit temple who had given me a hard time.
My health is really getting low, I said. Perhaps this would be a good time to transform,
suggested Spike.
Not yet, Spike. I know they are aware that I can do that as well as control it, and they are doing their best to make me use it now rather than later. I will transform, but only when I feel the time is right. Besides, the worst they can do is kill me, but I do have 2 fairies on hand which will revive me when necessary. I'm not sure what it is about these 2, but they're hiding something,
I said.
Okay, I trust in your judgment,
said Spike. If I weren't as aware as I was, I would have transformed without a moment's notice, yet I know Trixie and Chrysalis want me to change, so I'm not going to use it until I find out what they're hiding. Trixie then came around again and started to prepare her fire magic, but I was ready for her, but then Chrysalis came along at the last minute, and was probably going to cause trouble, so when the former fired her magic, I reflected it back at the other, which caused her quite a bit of pain.
That fiery magic! It's too hot for me to handle,
said Chrysalis.
She caused me to attack you by accident,
said Trixie.
I'm aware of that, Coom, but why hasn't she transformed yet? With all of the damage she has taken so far, she should have resorted to it by now. Is it possible that she has figured out our strategy?
asked Chrysalis.
If she has, then we must take things more seriously,
replied Trixie.
Or we can just kill her given how she is barely holding on as it is,
said Chrysalis.
Then allow me to perform the task, and I will ensure that she burns to ashes,
said Trixie. She flew over until she was floating above me, and then immediately used her fire magic, which I couldn't avoid. As I slumped down to the ground having been killed, one of my fairies appeared above my head, and brought me back to life and restored my health to full before leaving. Trixie was shocked at what had just happened, for she was unaware that I came prepared.
Did she just get revived by a fairy? I don't believe this. How did we not know of this information? Perhaps she left the temple,
suggested Chrysalis.
Then once again we have underestimated her, and it has made us feel humiliated. Kotake, we have no other choice but to take things to the next level. I know that we wanted her to transform, but our strategy doesn't seem to be working anymore. Besides, I think she will enjoy what our true power is really like because we don't get that many chances to use it,
said Trixie.
If this is what must be done, then I agree with the idea, Coom, but I suggest we take care of her quickly,
said Chrysalis.
No need to get into a panic,
said Trixie.
Our slight bickering could cost us, so we must concentrate and finish the job,
said Chrysalis. Even though I only heard a few bits and pieces of what they were talking about, it seems that Trixie chose to ignore something important, so I hope it isn't anything serious. That's when the 2 started to fly around in a circle, and kept on doing this repeatedly while moving closer and closer.
"What are they up to?"
I asked.
"I don't know, but be prepared for anything,"
replied Spike.
"Forest girl, you shall bear witness to our true power,"
said Trixie.
"Her name is Sunset Shimmer, so we should at least be referring to her as that,"
corrected Chrysalis. This did give her a scathing reaction from Trixie, so she chose to simply keep silent about it. As the two witches continued flying around above my head in circles, they looked as though they were merging together to form one being, and if that's true then things were about to get a whole lot worse.
"Coom and Kotakis double dynamite attack,"
said Trixie and Chrysalis at the same time. The entire room then got covered with a blinding flash, and I had to cover my eyes to avoid being blinded by what was happening. Unlike previous flashes, this one lasted for quite some time, but then I heard something coming from somewhere in front of me, and it sounded like a booming laugh. As my vision finally came back, my jaw dropped because Trixie and Chrysalis were no longer flying before me. Instead, I was looking at a rather tall and beautiful woman who appeared to have some traits of them across her body, but was mostly her own person, which made me suspect that this was what they had been hiding from me.
"What just happened?"
I asked.
"The two witches have joined together, and have become twin Rova, which means their combined power is going to make things more difficult. Like before, the mirror shield will reflect her magic back, but you need the shield to absorb it 3 times before you can counterattack. Yet you must absorb the same kind of magic that many times, otherwise it gets disrupted, and you'll have to start again. She is going to hover to each side of the giant platform where she will throw some magic at you before moving on and repeating the process, so be prepared to have the shield absorb it,"
replied Spike.
"I'm going to guess that her attacks inflict even more damage,"
I said.
"Correct, so be careful not to absorb the wrong magic. Also, when she is weakening, Twin Rova may attempt to confuse you by alternating her choice of spells. Once she has been blasted with her own magic, which you need to be within range, otherwise you'll miss, you'll be able to use the Master Sword, or the Big Goron's sword depending on which one you have preference with, to strike repeatedly until she finally goes down,"
said Spike.
"This would be the right time to transform,"
I began.
"But,"
asked Spike.
"I'm going to hold back just a little while longer,"
I replied. While it may look like I'm acting cowardly, in truth I'm simply being conservative given how it only lasts for a short period of time. I need to use it when I know that I'm about to achieve victory, and also because I want to prove that I can handle this situation without having to rely some kind of trump card. My transformation is one that I can't use as a crutch, for it would make me appear weak, and I've come so far along my journey before I was even able to use it properly due to having so much fear in my heart. I'm going to handle things my way, and only rely on it as a last-ditch effort should it come to that. It also means not allowing my emotions to get the better of me, as that would be the worst outcome, so I raised my sword and shield, and prepared for whatever this combined form was going to throw at me.
"Are you trembling, child?"
asked Twin Rova.
"Maybe a little bit, but I know that I can't myself to feel intimidated," I replied. "You should feel honored, for very few have ever managed to see our true form, yet no one has ever survived to tell the tale. You should have run away, but instead you chose to continue on, and now you have come to regret such a decision. We could grant you a little bit of mercy, but we remember all of the trouble you've caused for us, and for the great Ganondorf," said Twin Rova. "What may have been trouble from your perspective is saving this world from mine," I said. Typical words coming from a hero,
said Twinrova.
I think the time for talking is at an end,
I said.
We agree with you, but would you not prefer to show us your transformed being? It could give you a better chance at surviving the fury that we are about to unleash upon you,
suggested Twinrova. I knew it. They want me to change so that I can use it up much sooner, and then be unable to rely on it should they choose to get even more serious. I'm not going to allow them the opportunity, so I shook my head to refuse their request, and they didn't take too kindly about it.
Why do you refuse our offer again? Is there something seriously wrong with you for not wanting to follow our suggestions even when they are for your own benefit? Then know that we won't be asking anything like it in the future, so be prepared to pay for being so stubborn, and choosing to act like a foolish child.
Twinrova then raised what appeared to be a magic wand covered in fire, and flung a fireball which struck me in the chest because I wasn't paying attention because of having to listen to her ranting.
That fireball spread across almost the entire pillar,
I said.
Because Twinrova is a stronger form, her magic covers a much greater distance. You'll be able to avoid such attacks if you stand on the corners of the central pillar, yet it does depend on where she is aiming for you when she attacks,
said Spike.
I could even jump onto those smaller pillars if I wanted to,
I said.
Or you could fall down to the floor below. The only problem with that aside from taking additional fall damage is climbing back up, and I don't know if Twinrova will give you the chance without attacking first,
said Spike. Twinrova then hovered over to the next side of the central pillar, and flung another fireball which the mirror shield absorbed where the fireball disappeared into it. That's when the shield started glowing with an unusual noise, making it difficult to concentrate, and the mirrored surface had some kind of weird pattern on it.
What's going on with this shield? It's never done anything like this before. Remember when I said that it can absorb energy? The fire magic is seen as energy, so the mirror shield has absorbed it, and is currently storing it ready for you to unleash it when you've gotten enough stored up. That noise coming from the shield is an unfortunate side effect which will get worse as more magic gets absorbed, but there's not much you can do other than get used to it,
said Spike. As I stared at the polished surface, I could see the resulting fire which will come forth, yet in a way I felt bad about having to rely on such a manner. I would have preferred to use my own magic against Twinrova, but my own power pales in comparison, so I guess using their magic to defeat is my only means of succeeding. I'm hoping that I don't have to use Ganondorf's magic against him when that time comes, otherwise I'm not going to be doing all that much apart from reflecting foreign magic back to where it came from.
So you do know how that shield works?
Asked Twinrova.
I thought it was obvious by now,
I replied.
Don't get too cocky, forest girl, for this battle has only just begun. Even if you manage to turn our own power back against us, you don't know how long it will take for you to achieve victory, do you? No, we didn't think you would know something like that, so things could be worse than you think,
said Twinrova. I'm not sure why they decided to mention this, but my best guess was they wanted to trick me into making a costly mistake, so I shook my head as an indicator that I wasn't about to fall for any of their tricks.
Having some doubts? You're supposed to be the hero of time, yet from our perspective it seems destiny had gotten it wrong, for you're not exactly heroic material. That's actually a true statement,
I said.
Are you trying to trick us?
Asked Twinrova.
I'm not what you'd call an ideal hero as I don't fit the mold, but then I've managed to do well,
I replied.
No true hero would refer to themselves in such a demeaning manner, so you must be tricking us into giving you sympathy. Nice try, forest girl, but you will have to do a lot better if you think you can outwit those who have lived for centuries,"
laughed Twinrova. While I felt a little annoyed about being called a liar, it did mean that they were once again underestimating me. I guess these two have become deluded over seeing everyone other than themselves and Ganondorf as worthless, so they end up making critical mistakes. They then flung another fireball which I absorbed with the mirror shield, and then hovered over to the next spot where they threw an ice ball, which is not what I wanted to see coming. I needed to avoid getting hit because doing so would cause me to lose the stored up fire magic, and I'd take a lot of damage in addition to being frozen. The ice then struck the pillar, turning it into an icy surface, yet I avoided it by jumping down to the floor below.
"That was close," I said. "You could have jumped to one of those smaller pillars," said Spike. "Coming down here was the first thing that popped into my head," I said. "You'll need to climb back up eventually, as you can't really do anything down here," said Spike. "Hopefully, they won't attack me while I attempt to get back up, but maybe I should wait for them to attack so that I can eventually get those fireballs again," I suggested.
Twinrova eventually discovered where I was hiding, and proceeded to use more ice balls which covered up the central pillar, yet why were they doing that when they knew I was still down below waiting for the chance to come back up? When I finally climbed back up, I was shocked to see ice was covering almost every last portion of the pillar's surface. Even though it was rapidly melting because it was magical, I had to traverse it a little, which could be problematic. Twinrova laughed as they flung a fireball this time, which is what I needed, so I absorbed it into the mirror shield, and that gave me 3 lots. All of a sudden, the shield shot out a stream of flames, so moving across the icy floor and falling onto my rear a few times, I reached Twinrova just as the magic was used up, but there was just enough to hit them with, and they dropped down to the pillar they was hovering above.
"No. How could you have overcome such a slippery slope?"
asked Twinrova.
"I've gotten used to moving around on ice despite falling at times," I replied.
With that, I jumped over to where they was lying on the ground, and started striking repeatedly with the Master Sword, even though I would rather use magic, but they're immune to all forms of magic except for their own. Speaking of magic, I was thinking about using Nehru's Love, but that's an underhanded approach. Eventually, Twinrova managed to recover from their mishap, so I leapt back to the central pillar just as they hovered back up into the air.
"How dare you do this to us?"
shouted Twinrova.
"Don't like getting injured?"
I asked.
"You've been a thorn in our sides for too long, forest girl, and what you just did has really angered us. We were hoping you would transform by now, but it seems we were wrong about how effective you are as a hero. If you were longing for us to take things up a notch, then we're happy to oblige,"
replied Twinrova. The tone in their voice was one of rage, and they threw a fireball which I absorbed into the mirror shield, but then they immediately followed up with an ice ball which I wasn't expecting, and I had no time to avoid this attack, so I raised my shield again where what I had absorbed disappeared. Of course, I would become frozen in the process, where my health took a sudden nosedive, and Twinrova merely laughed at my misery.
"How does it feel being frozen? This is just the start of your torment, child, for we have so more where that came from."
As I broke free from my icy prison, they launched another ice ball which struck me before I could even do anything.
"Are you okay?"
asked Spike.
"I'm a lot better than I thought," I replied. "Being frozen back at Zora's fountain, and prior to this onslaught has given you a slight resistance," said Spike.
"Lucky me," I said without using sarcasm, as I was really lucky to have had this come up. When I broke free this time, Twin Rova began throwing ice balls at a rapid pace, and I suspected they were losing control with their emotions. Raising the mirror shield, I absorbed 3 different ice balls, and I let them have it by letting my shield unleash a cold spray just like the ones in those treasure chest traps. They dropped down again, and I struck them a few more times with my sword before they regained her composure. I could tell they were just outraged with how I've been able to hold my own despite all of the threats they have made against me, but it proves that I'm not to be underestimated just because of not being a proper hero in that sense. Twin Rova then launched a fireball which was followed by a much larger one, and then they hovered to the next side before throwing a third one. I absorbed the first 2 fireballs into the mirror shield, but not the third one, meaning I got consumed in fire yet again.
"They are getting serious now," said Spike. "Which means I need to do the same," I said. "You mean transform?"
asked Spike.
"I've kept a hold of it for as long as I needed to, but now I feel it must be used. The witches are exhausted given the sweat dripping from their brow, so I'm going to assume that a couple more hits will do the job, and it does mean finally following their advice. Plus, I'm getting low on health again, so I might need the assistance of my remaining fairy, but hopefully it won't come to that,"
I replied.
"Are you sure Twin Rova will let you change?"
asked Spike.
"We're about to find out,"
I replied. Closing my eyes and beginning to concentrate, I knew the time was right to transform, and I believe this would be the first time I'm properly using a sword and shield combination in my stronger form. Sure enough, Twin Rova chose not to attack, and allowed me the time to transform. After concentrating for a few moments, my pony ears appeared on top of my head, followed by my pony tail, which extended down from my hair. Already I could feel my strength and magic increasing, yet the magic component isn't going to be helpful here, and I also hope this lasts long enough for what I need to do.
"So this is your true form?"
asked Twin Rova.
"I would say it's more of a partial transition between my human and real form," I replied. "Then what do you really look like?"
asked Twin Rova.
"If you must know, my real form is a pony," I replied. "A pony?"
exclaimed Twin Rova.
"To be more precise, I'm a unicorn," I said. "This is starting to become really cumbersome, Forest Girl, for these claims of yours are really wearing thin on us. Granted, we don't question why you gain the ears and tail of an equine, as that's your personal business, but the fact that you say that you're a pony is nothing short of absurd. It doesn't really matter to us, of course, for this is what we wanted you to become much sooner. It may be a little late, but now we can truly say the battle has begun, yet you look as though you're barely holding on. Since you've transformed, we shall give our thanks by no longer holding back,"
said Twin Rova. I'm not sure if I like the way they said that, yet I need to finish this before my transformation ends. They then moved over to the next side of the pillar, and flung an ice ball which I absorbed, but suddenly went back the other way, and flung a second ice ball right above me which I couldn't avoid. While my shield did absorb it, I still got frozen, yet I quickly broke free as my stronger form does give me some improved resistances.
"I'm still standing," I said. "That will change in a moment," said Twin Rova.
They then launched a barrage of ice balls which the mirror shield absorbed one, but it ended up being a waste as the rest all connected with me, where some bounced off my body, and the rest froze me. When I broke free, I could feel my health slipping, so it meant one more revival was coming, so I decided to press the attack. Twin Rova assumed nothing was wrong, and threw a fireball which my shield absorbed, and by this point the noise was something I had gotten used to. They threw 2 more fireballs that got absorbed into the mirror shield, which was followed by me unleashing the burst of flame which knocked Twinrova down again, and I struck them a few more times, which still wasn't enough.
I'll admit that for a couple of frail women, you two certainly know how to take punishment,
I said.
You insolent brat!
Shouted Twinrova.
What did I say?
I asked.
How dare you insult the surrogate mothers of the great Ganondorf? Just for that, we're going to give you the strongest spell we can muster, and not even that shield of yours is going to be enough to protect you,
replied Twinrova. They concentrated and fired the largest fireball I had ever seen, and while I raised the mirror shield hoping for it to absorb the blast, it didn't work. The blast knocked me off the central pillar, and I landed on the floor before collapsing where I once died.
The forest girl has been killed, which means no one can oppose the great Ganondorf again. We'll admit that she lasted a long time for someone so young, but in the end our experience proved to be too much. We no longer need to remain together, so we shall separate back to our previous selves, and prepare Nibiru for more brainwashing.
Twinrova had actually turned away from where I fell, and had been gloating the entire time, so when they turned around to discover that I was standing in front of them once again, they completely lost it.
What? 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 How can you still be alive? I still had one more fairy,
I replied.
Then you tricked us!
Shouted Twinrova.
Because I figured out from the start that you had been doing that to me. I knew you wanted me to transform, and use it up too soon, so I chose to hold back until I felt ready to use it, and also wanting to prove I didn't need it. To be honest, you actually helped me rather than hindered me, and for that I must thank you, as I never would have made it this far otherwise. Plus, I proved to Sunset Demon that I can handle things without needing to transform in order to solve the problem. Anyway, thanks to my remaining fairy, I've got my health back, so we can now keep going if you want,
I said.
Are you implying that we shall lose?
Asked Twinrova.
That complexion does make me think it,
I replied. Without even choosing to respond, I could tell Twinrova had essentially snapped at this point, but it wasn't my intention. In a blind fit of rage, they launched many ice balls at me which I dodged, but I managed to absorb the right amount into the mirror shield before launching another cold spray which brought them down once again. I quickly ran over, and struck a few more times with the Master Sword before switching to the Big Goron's sword, as a part of me wanted to go overboard as a means of making them suffer for what they've done. I only hit Twinrova once using the strongest blade, which finally defeated them, and their scream was proof of my victory. They floated into the air before starting to spin around and shrinking down to perhaps a more moderate size.
You did it!
Exclaimed Spike.
That felt like it lasted forever,
I said.
But, you finally defeated the witches, which means the desert will eventually return to normal,
said Spike.
Better hold off on those celebrations, I said.
Twinrova then separated into an orange fireball, and a blue one, which then landed in front of me. Soon, I was standing before Trixie and Chrysalis, who appeared very annoyed, but were surprisingly unharmed given the punishment they had sustained during the battle.
I can't believe that she defeated us,
said Trixie.
We underestimated her abilities, and as a result we were bested,
said Chrysalis.
It was because of you holding us back that caused this to happen,
moaned Trixie.
No, you were the one who was acting without thinking,
said Chrysalis.
Either way, We need to get really serious as we can't allow this girl to awaken the final sage. She may have defeated us, but her transformation won't last for much longer, so we just need to strike when it wears off. We can do this Kotaka if we attack at the same time, and not hold back until she is dead. With no fairies to revive her this time, we will be victorious,"
said Trixie. She then turned to Chrysalis, who had been silent during her speech, and at first she felt angry over being ignored, but then she noticed a strange white ring was hanging above her sister's head.
"What is that thing you have above your head?" "I don't know what it is, but you have one too, Coom, and I think I'm starting to get the idea,"
replied Chrysalis.
"What are you saying?"
asked Trixie.
"You and I are dead,"
replied Chrysalis. Hearing those words, especially the last one, left Trixie unable to say anything for a couple of minutes, and in the meantime I was just watching, for I honestly had no clue as to what was about to happen. I assumed that they were ready to fight again, but it seems that their time in this world has come to an end.
"But I'm only 400 years old!"
shouted Trixie.
"And I'm just 380 years old!"
added Chrysalis.
"We're twins! Don't try to lie about your age!"
shouted Trixie.
"You must have gone senile!"
shouted Chrysalis.
"Who are you calling senile? Is that how you treat your older sister?"
asked Trixie.
"If you hadn't been acting like an idiot by not taking this fight against Sunset Shimmer seriously, we wouldn't be in this position we're in right now. Also, you never once referred to her by name, and when we were one, I tried to speak it, yet you kept on silencing me, which just annoyed me to no end. This is all your fault for being so stubborn!"
shouted Chrysalis.
"My fault? If anything, it's your fault for ignoring the fact that the great Ganondorf has essentially killed us, even though she is the one who did it. You were too weak to be of any use at all during this entire situation,"
said Trixie.
"No. You were useless!"
shouted Chrysalis. I never would have guessed that they had so much rage built up inside them, but they could no longer hold it back, and decided to unleash it. Just seeing them at each other's throats reminded me of what I used to be like before I discovered friendship, and what happened to my friends when bickering almost drove them apart. It looked like Trixie and Chrysalis were about to really make things worse, but then they started to float upwards towards the ceiling before disappearing through it. Their fate had now been revealed. They may not like it, but there is nothing anyone can do about it now, and perhaps they will learn to get along in the afterlife.
"We'll come back to haunt you!"
shouted Trixie and Chrysalis. And just like that, everything was quiet again, which made me feel uneasy, but I suppose it was a good feeling given what I had endured. The portal to the Chamber of Sages had appeared to my right, but my interest was to the left, where a heart container had dropped, and I could do with a pick-me-up. When I walked over and collected it, I felt the same warmth that comes whenever I get one of these, and after feeling more light-hearted than ever before, I entered the portal, where I found myself back at the Chamber of Sages.
"I wonder who the final sage is?"
asked Spike.
"If the pattern is consistent, then I think I know who,"
I replied.
"What are you talking about?"
asked Spike.
"Just mumbling something to myself,"
I replied. All of my friends from the human world have so far become sages, and I couldn't believe it took me this long to finally figure that out. The only one left was Rainbow Dash, so it must be her. The orange raised platform then started to glow, and the one who rose up from it who happened to be who I suspected.
"Kid, let me thank you for everything you've done, not only for me, but for Spitfire, and the entirety of the Gerudo tribe. For the first time in what feels like forever, my people can live in peace, and perhaps with the other tribes. He he he. Look what you've become in the past 7 years. A competent swordswoman,
said Rainbow Dash. I'm not quite sure how I should have taken that, given it sounded like an insult, yet I suppose she was just being herself, which is something she hasn't done in 7 years. I simply shrugged my shoulders because I had no idea how to respond, and she then started laughing, which made me even more confused.
You haven't changed, and I do mean that quite literally, given you haven't aged. And I already explained why that is,
I said.
It has to do with your equestrian magic, doesn't it?
Asked Rainbow Dash.
How were you able to figure that out, given you were missing for years?
I asked.
I actually discovered the truth before Kum and Kotaka made me disappear, but when you freed me from their control, I couldn't recall anything until I ended up here. Some of it still confuses me, but I've mostly got the gist of it,
replied Rainbow Dash.
Guess you know where I'm really from, hey?
I asked.
That was perhaps the biggest thing I had trouble believing in, but now that I've been in this chamber for a while, I'm actually seeing just what your home is really like. It's rather boring for my liking, but you need to return there,
replied Rainbow Dash. She then went silent, which had me thinking that she was still having some doubts, yet it turned out she had something else on her mind, and she was having a little bit of trouble trying to convey it into words. Rather than force her, I decided to give her as much time as necessary to figure out how to explain it. It took her a while before she came up with an answer, and it must have been something if it had taken this long.
By the way, I really messed up. I was brainwashed by those old witches and used by Ganondorf to do his evil will. I even allowed Spitfire to succumb to a similar means, all because of not choosing to act sooner, but what could I have done? It all worked out in the end,
I said.
Perhaps, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place. Now that I've had a chance to think about it, I know now that Spitfire will make an excellent leader of the Gerudo, for she has proven herself to be worthy. I know my people are in good hands, which makes this next bit much easier for me to say. I was thinking of going back and helping them, but I can't anymore as I've been gone for too long. They probably think I've perished, and while I want to prove them wrong, I can't do that now because of being here. I'm laughing at the fact that a person like me could turn out to be the Sage of Spirit. And now that I've awoken, I'm going to fight them as one of the 6 sages. I want to get my revenge for what they did to me and to my people, but I know that way of thinking would never work because of the negative repercussions behind it,
said Rainbow Dash.
Vengeance is never the answer to a problem, I said. My people would forever shun me, and my legacy were I to resort to such tactics,
said Rainbow Dash. I would never seek revenge, no matter how badly someone wronged me, but the Gerudo might, given their profession. That must have been one of the reasons why the other tribes mistreated them for generations, because revenge is something that is often frowned upon, yet now they can finally turn to a new chapter where they can realize a new potential.
It will probably take about a generation or 2 before the other tribes can accept them as being just, but it isn't going to be one of those forever things. Kid. No. Sunset Shimmer, the hero of time. 7 years ago, I promised that I would do something for you in return for giving me the silver gauntlets, but it seems my original promise couldn't be kept. Things happened which were beyond your control, I said. Maybe so, but I feel like I've done a great wrong, so I am going to make a new promise which I know can be kept. From now on, I shall fight alongside you as one of the 6 sages, and together with the others, we shall put an end to Ganondorf's reign over Hyrule. Now, I give you this medallion. Take it,"
said Rainbow Dash. She then raised her arms above her head, and an orange medallion dropped down from the ceiling. Upon grabbing it, I realized that I now had all 6 of these trinkets, and that also meant they were all awakened at last. The sages, that is. As I started to return to the desert, which was the most likely place, I could hear Rainbow Dash say something.
"If only I had kept the promise I made back then, but I know deep in my heart that this one will be kept."
Just when I thought things were finally looking up, I was suddenly brought to a stop which didn't make sense. How can anyone stop me from going back to Hyrule, especially after leaving the chamber? Could this be Ganondorf's doing? No, I doubt he has that kind of power, so who could be behind this? That's when a figure appeared from the shadows, and I had a feeling this may end up being a bad situation. To be continued. Chapter 65, The Last Legend.